Hi, I'm Rick Crow, and this is Short Track Stories.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Short Track Stories. Brandon Crow alongside Uncle Rick Crow. This is episode 5. Thank you so much for tuning in, for watching, for listening, for liking and subscribing, and hopefully you've enjoyed what you've been able to listen to and hear and see. I know some of the comments have been very cool, very humbling. It's been awesome. So keep it coming. We'll keep the content coming your way. And through the first 5 episodes, Uncle Rick, how you feeling?
It's awesome. The response has been incredible. And even some family and friends, have got a hold of me versus of the drivers, themselves. And it's just been cool. It's been cool.
That's awesome. So again, continue, please like and subscribe and continue to share. It's been very cool to see all the numbers continue to grow, and we're going to try to continue to bring more guests to you. And speaking of guests, here for episode number 5, a very special guest, Jimmy Insolo, one of the legends of the West Coast racing scene. Uncle Rick, you rode and drove the number 38 car because of Jimmy Insolo. Why was Jimmy Insolo so instrumental in your life?
Dude, this was an emotional one for me because, I grew up idolizing Jimmy, and he was my mom's favorite driver. And obviously that was, something that was instilled in me. And, Grandma Peggy used to just say, he never uses his bumper. He's clean. And when I decided to go racing, the 38 jumped right on the side of my car very, very naturally. And I carried it with pride. And, getting to speak with Jimmy and hear some of his stories, you even said it. There was a couple times a little choked up and a little surprised look on my face. The guy's accomplished so much in his career. It's been awesome.
Yeah, some of the stories that you're going to hear and that you're going to listen to over this podcast, there was a couple times where I just looked at Uncle Rick and both of us had the same look on our face. Our chin was dropped and we're like, what? And so, he drops names like, Richard Petty, Dale Earnhardt. We go through the whole gamut.
Yeah. And what's funny is he drove Dale Earnhardt's car. He drove Richard Petty's car, and the precision with which he tells stories from the 60s. I can't even remember, stuff 4 days ago. It's been incredible. I know he lost his wife recently, and his daughter had messaged me and said, what a blessing it was for us to have the dad on the show. And I don't know, I got chills just talking about it. But he rubbed elbows with a lot of people, and you're going to find out in the episode, if you tune in, that he changed possibly the history of NASCAR racing and the number of championships that each driver have, and maybe even a few Rookie of the Year things that we didn't know about.
Very true. Very true. Well, like always, thank you again for supporting. Now sit back, relax, and listen to the Short Track Stories told to you by Jimmy Insolo. All right, Jimmy, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here on Short Track Stories. I'm Brandon Crow. This is my Uncle Rick Crow, and this is such an honor and a privilege for us to be here with you. And thank you again so much for taking the time to be with us here. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Glad to be here with you.
So, first of all, let's say thanks to the Minties for setting this up. And Junior said he had chills earlier. I'm a little emotional on the whole thing too. And my mom was a huge Insolo fan, and Jimmy, I followed in that footstep and took the number 38 as an Insolo fan. And it's just great to see you and great to have you here. And we want to, our goal is to hear some good stories and to talk about some things and
maybe learn a thing or two.
Maybe
we all will.
So as I look back, you didn't really race at Saugus a ton compared to how much stuff you did with the Pacific Racing Series and the West. You kind of just jumped right into that initially?
Well, I worked on a guy's car named Phil Governale there at Saugus back in 62, 61, something like that. This friend of mine, that's how I got started. This friend of mine, his folks sponsored his car for transmissions. And we were just running around one Friday night. We went over there to his house, and then I got hooked on the deal, kept going back every night. They put me to work on the car. And then his brother built a car. And then I drove his old car one night at Saugus in the heat race, and that was the beginning of the whole thing. And so I had to build my own car. And the first time I raced there was 63. And we raced there pretty much every Saturday night up until probably 1970. And then we started traveling wanted to do the West Coast deal. We started traveling around with that on the NASCAR Winston West.
Right. And so sometime during that span at Saugus, I remember you in that 4S Rambler, that red, white, and blue Rambler.
Yeah.
That was a pretty bad machine. What was so special about that car?
Well, the guy who owned that car, his name was Carl Strogaard. And he built the car. And at that time, I was running the Winston West. And he called me up, asked me if I'd be interested in driving it for him Saturday nights at Saugus when I was home. So whenever I was home from the West deal, I would go to drive it at Saugus for him. And we won a couple of main events with it. And when I was gone, he would put other people in it like Orrin Prosser, Bill Foster, a few of those guys. And then when I'd come home, he'd put me back in it. And we had pretty good luck with the car.
Yeah, I just remember that car always.
A Rambler, but they asked me why I'd want to drive it, and I says because it's something different. And it kind of surprised a bunch of people how good the car ran.
I think those Ramblers were long arm truck arm cars in the back.
No, it was a torsion bar car.
Interesting.
He built the car, and it had cross torsions in the back and straight torsions in the front. And didn't run a sway bar on the car either. And Orrin always wanted a sway bar on the car. And when he put it on there, and when I come back, we'd take it off because the car didn't drive as good for me.
We tried not running a sway bar before. I don't remember what happened with that. So Jimmy, I think you worked with my Uncle Howard. What did you work for the city of LA? Is that what you did?
Yeah, I did. And he was a buyer for the city. In fact, he lives over here behind me, behind the school.
Yeah, you're still up on Steinway. Is that where you're at?
No, I'm on
Ermine.
Yeah. And I see him every once in a while walking. Is he still doing good, or have you talked to him?
No, I talk to him all the time. He's doing good. And my dad, Vern, also, you guys knew him. He's gone, but Uncle Howard's still right there behind you at Sky Blue. So the city job, working for the city of Los Angeles, kind of afforded you, maybe not financially, but the time and the stability to partake of this crazy West travel schedule. I saw it today for the first time. It was ridiculous, the amount of travel you guys did.
I worked for a first place time I started running that deal. I worked at a place called Weston Hydraulics, a machine shop in Van Nuys. And the superintendent there knew that I raced. And like the first time I went to Riverside for a Permatex race, I called in sick that day. And I get down there to Riverside, and the car broke during practice. Well, there was a guy named Vern Johnson that had a tow truck that used to come to Saugus. Well, they come to push me back to the garage. Well, of all people, here's my superintendent from the machine shop right in the tow truck. And he goes, "What are you doing here today?" And I said, "Well, I called in sick." And he said, "So did I." And we just became friends. And they allowed me to take off whenever I wanted. Back in the early 70s, I worked there till 73. And then I got laid off from there and just started racing. And the Weaver brothers that made the oil pumps and all that stuff, they were taking care of the dry sump pumps. They were taking care of us with parts and all that. And I went down there one day to get some parts, and they said, "We want you to come to work." And I said, "I don't want to come to work. I'm racing. I'm making more money with my unemployment racing than I do working." And they go, "Well, you can come and go as you please." And I says, "Okay, I'll do that then." And then they moved to
Interesting.
Carson City, and I worked for Charlie Saeed after that. And it was easy to take off for him because he was racing.
Right.
And then just you know, I always had good jobs where I could come and go as I pleased, kind of. And then I had a chance to go to work for the city, and I really wasn't racing much after that.
Gotcha.
But it was a great job to for all of. I found out I had to have a job that had a retirement, so because I was getting older, and
Yeah.
they had the retirement and everything. So like I've been
Yeah.
retired from there almost 12 years now.
So Weston, that's where my dad worked there, Vern. And so maybe that's, kind of how my family got attached to you back then. And then he went to hydraulic research, and then he worked for Borg Warner, all the same kind of hydraulic industry type stuff. And so you brought up Charlie Saeed, and I remember I always did my numbers exactly those chisel point numbers. The gold chisel point numbers were awesome. But Saeed wrecked what I thought was probably one of your best cars until you brought out the next car. How did that happen?
Well, we'd taken that car to go run a Trans Am race, and it was been changed around. The engine had been moved forward in it and stuff to meet their rules. And off and on, I was driving Charlie's car whenever I was home too. And he says, "Well, let me drive your old car." And I go, "Well, okay." So it's just sitting there. So he got in it. Then he wrecked it. And I was in the same heat I but driving his car. I was sitting in his car, and I seen the car go in the air. And that was the end of that car. It really took care of that car.
Yeah, but it made it into the Saga Speedway coloring book, so it's forever immortalized.
Yeah, right. It'll always be famous for that.
So
we gave the car to this guy, Jack, that used to work at Hooper's rear end, so he could cut it up, haul it off, and get the scrap. And for years, the check he got for the scrap was hanging on the wall in Hooper's rear end shop, and he got a total $8 for the scrap for that car.
Oh. And what was the SCCA race that you guys were in with that car? What do you know what year that was?
Yeah, well, it was probably the same year that the car got wrecked, whatever year that was. And we went to Laguna Seca for the Trans Am race that year.
Yeah. You know who was in that race with you besides some really good guys that you beat up on?
Well, we didn't run very good in that car, but George Fulmer was there, and Greg Pickett, and all the big kids that ran the Trans Am back then. I don't remember a lot of these names.
Bruce Jenner was one of them.
I don't remember racing with him.
Yeah. Caitlyn Jenner, Bruce Jenner owned a car and had a car and was racing that series up at Laguna Seca that you guys jumped in, and another time at Sears Point in Sonoma. So you start racing and you pretty much, and this is the same thing I said to True the other night, is you guys kind of just jumped right into like an Ontario where you're going a good clip down the chute, or Riverside on the backstretch, you're doing a $180. You guys just jumped right into that in some old full grown man cars, your Chevelles and your Monte Carlos and that stuff.
Right, because we didn't know any better. But the West Coast, the Winston West, though, that was part of our schedule, and we had to run those races there to get the points for the Winston West series. So you had to go there and make the race, and it was part of the point deal then. So you had to go down there and race with those guys, whether you could afford it or not. But that's where you learned how to race for those guys.
Right.
And then they opened Ontario, and I mean, that was quite a place to go to when they first opened it.
I remember my mom making my dad drive us to Ontario and Riverside to watch Jimmy Insolo. And I remember the other driver she liked was Ruben Garcia, and I don't know why. And I remember when he hit the wall and busted through the bricks there. But for a while you were running around in the West. An interesting tidbit in 70 at the Riverside Road course, Hornaday Senior finished 6th and you finished 7th. And in 71, you guys came right back and finished 6th and 7th again.
Yeah.
And so you're running around, Riverside a little bit. And then it took you what I would consider, and not in a bad way, but I wonder how guys keep doing this for so long. You didn't start clicking off your first wins for a few years. You were still getting your feet wet, huh?
Yeah. The first race I ever won was at Saugus. And they used to have this thing called the Monza 120. And it was 340 lap main events. And then whoever had the best finishes was the overall winner of that deal. And I won that the first year I ever raced. And then it took me till 66 to win another race. But it was quite a thrill to win that one race. And then it was no big deal, if you didn't win, because you didn't know what winning was all about. But then you started winning and you realize that's the thing to do. So then you try harder all the time. And I had good people working on my car. This guy, Roger Paquette, he owned the cars with me. And then we got Leon Ruther working on the car. And he was a great fabricator and just overall good guy. And, we started winning more races. And then we figured out, well, what this is all about is to win. So every place we went there to win.
Where were you keeping the cars at that point, Jimmy? Were you at some point, when did you move to Canyon Country?
I moved up here in 1980s. But before that, the cars were in my garage in Mission Hills. And Leon Ruther, he lived in Granada Hills. And we had whenever we had 2 cars, we had the second car in his garage.
And what about Marvin? Where he was around for a long time too, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's the guy that got connected first. See, that first Chevrolet we had, it was John Ward's old car. And he ran Saugus there for quite a while. And then somehow he got hooked up with a place called C&T Automotive in North Hollywood. There was a speed shop and it became Hank the Crank. Well, Marv worked there as an engine assembler. And they wound up owning that car. They had something to do with John Ward, the movie deal and all that. And they had the car over at this other guy's house, not far from me in Mission Hills, named Howard Faulkner. And he had the car over there getting it ready. And Howard says to him one night, I went over there. He says, well, who's going to drive this car? And Marv says, Don Fisher's going to drive it the first 3 races. He was another hero over there at Saugus at the time. And then he said, I don't remember. He said he's going to drive it the first 3 races, then he's going to go back and run his own car. And so they took the car was number 8 when it was that movie car. So they took and just painted out half the 8, made it a 3 because that was his number. And then after that, I started driving the car and we go to Saugus. And this is kind of how we got our number 38 they said, well, you can't have 3. We said, well, what about 8? Well, a guy named Bill Spall had number 8. So we said, how about we put 38 on it? They said, yeah, nobody's got 38. So that's how our number came about. And we just had that number because my first number when I first raced my Oldsmobiles was 15 before Orrin had it.
Oh, and then you can't take Orrin's number.
Well, I had it first, see, before Orrin ever did. And then when I started racing this car, we made it 38. And then Donnie took the 15.
Right.
So that became Orrin's number forever after that.
I had to race with the 93 my first year in super late models or sportsman cars. I had to race with 93 because I think Michael Ayers had 38. And then I thought, 93 was Saeed's number. There's some connection to Jimmy there. And then I ended up swapping them back and finally got the 38. And then I was smart enough to just register it in every division at Saugus. So it was always my number, right? So
do you remember that old timers race they had over there at Saugus and I drove your car that night?
Tell me that story, because I was looking for it in the paper and I know they did a newspaper article on it, but tell me how you remember that story.
Well, Orrin was good. They were going to have an old timers race, and Orrin was going to drive 15, which Rod Johnson was driving at that time. And I remember you called me up and said, I want you to drive my car because it's 38. And we went and worked on it a little bit. And we get over there and they let us qualify. Monty says, I want you guys to qualify because they weren't going to do that. And we qualified the two cars. And if they'd have let us race it with a regular sportsman deal, Orrin would have had fast time and I had second fast time. We out qualified all those regular sportsman guys. And then after you ran the main event in your car, you said, I don't think you're going to go very far because the clutch is slipping. So I didn't get to run but a couple of laps. So that was the end of it that night.
Oh, those had that car had a Doug Nash 2-speed, and those things were just leaking piles of junk. But I remember, and I think I was telling Brandon this, but I remember, I know I was telling my wife that in practice, you got out of the car and you said it's junk. It was, I think your exact words was, this thing's a piece of shit. It won't handle. And it was a brand new Jackson car, and I had only been racing super lates, probably 3 or 4 races. And I said, well, fix it, like do something. And you're like, no, it's your car. I don't. And I'm like, you're Jimmy Insolo, fix the car.
Yeah.
Like, make it how you want to drive it, And then I remember you got in it and you got a good clip, you clipped off a good lap. And I remember when I got back in it, I was like, oh my goodness, man, this is how this is supposed to feel. And so that was a good time to have you guys do that. I think Spangler was in that race. And
yeah, I think so.
Did Minty Senior drive Pat's car?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Interesting. So in the 70s, you start going Ontario and Orange Show and, traveling all over. But tell me the story. I heard a story about you and Bob Yallison and power steering or something like that.
Well, we were going to Riverside down there, and the way the power steering came about is there was a wrecking yard in Sun Valley owned by a guy named Morris Schmidt called Chevy Only.
Yeah.
Well, he would give us body pieces and stuff for our cars at the time, and he knew this guy named Tom Lee. That
Yes.
Lee Power Steering, and he did steering for sprint cars and midgets and all that stuff. And he says, well, he wants to get into the stock car deal. And I said, well, we're the perfect people because I need the help with the power steering. And so, and I worked at Weaver at that time. Well, Tom, he made the gearboxes and the pumps. And he says, I don't have any mount plates for this stuff. So Weaver says, well, we can do this because if we could sell parts, we'll make all this stuff. So we made all the mounts, and we went to Riverside with that on that car. And Bobby Allison used to come around and talk to me all the time after I beat him in that Permatex race that time. And he says, what's that? He looked at that power steering pump and he goes, what is that? I said, it's a power steering pump. And he goes, what kind of sissy are you that you need power steering? And I said, well, it comes down to the end of the race. I might be a little bit fresher than you are, And then he called Tom Lee and ordered some parts and stuff. And the story goes that he discovered power steering and Jeff Bodine discovered power steering. Well, we were the first ones to have it on the Cup cars. And to even have one of Weaver's oil pumps on our car. Nobody else had those at the time. And it's like he saw that and he ordered some, and then the Petty started buying those oil pumps. And it was a great deal for everybody at the time.
I always thought Bodine invented power steering. That was the story I heard.
They try to claim he did, but that's not true. At least in my opinion.
How did those guys initially treat you when they would come out west, Jimmy? How would they treat the guys out here, the Elders and the Knowles and the Prossers and McCoys and whoever,
Well, they were all real friendly with you until you got to racing with them and able to race with them. And then they didn't help you out as much. They kind of backed away. One of the guys that did that, we'd always seem to park next to Benny Parsons in the garage down there. And Benny was the neatest guy in the world. And when I got to being able to race with him, he wouldn't give me the information that he'd given me like before that. he kind of standoffish a little bit. But like Bobby Allison, he would help you no matter what. You know, when we used to run drum brakes down there, I asked him, what did they do to make those brakes last for 500 miles down there? And he come over and explained the whole deal to me. They put the self-adjusters on the things backwards. So they adjusted going forward because you couldn't stop during the race and adjust the brakes. And he showed us all how to do it and fix the adjusters and put the cables on it. So it all worked, you know. I mean, he was always real helpful with that kind of stuff. And like you could go talk to those guys because at that time, there was only about 5 or 6 people were allowed in the garage with each car. They didn't let all the spectators in there and have the garage tours and all that. So you could just go down and sit down and talk to those guys. And they were you find out they're just like everybody else. You know, like Richard Petty, the way you see him on TV, that's exactly the way he was. You know, and it's like there one time when we went down there when I was driving for that Lakes Drywall, we went there in January, the first time I drove for him at 78. And it's after it was the next year, 79. We were there in January. We were really fast during practice. And this one official from out here, which I won't mention any names.
Oh, come on, Jimmy.
We go through their inspection and he goes, you know, the nose on this car is like 2 inches too low. And he said, but I tell you what, if you raise it up an inch, we'll give you an inch. So we were really fast at practice, and it come time to qualify, and he measures the car and he says, the nose on the car is an inch low. And I said, well, you told us that we raised it an inch, you'd give us an inch. No, I didn't tell you that. And we'd pick up the car and jack it up and roll it into the deal to check the nose height again. He'd put his foot on the front bumper and push it back down. And I got beside myself, and Cale Yarborough came through right behind us with Junior Johnson's car. And they basically roll it in the inspection deal on the jack. And when they took it off the jack, it was like over 2 inches too low on the nose, and they waved him through.
So a little tough on the West guys, huh?
Yeah, well, they didn't like us being able to run with them, see? So I just kind of went ballistic on the deal. And the next morning, the crew chief says to me, it's Jackie Johnson on that car. He goes, what did you say to the people? And I said, well, I just told some people what I thought about NASCAR and the rest of them. And his mother called him from South Carolina and said it was in the newspaper back there about them messing with us. And this Bill Gazaway was a head guy there at Riverside for that time in the Cup cars. And me and him always got along great. Well, I walked in there Sunday morning and he was standing at the gate at the entrance to the pits. And he says, I need to talk to you. Come in the trailer. And he went in there and chewed me up one side and down the other and he says, you should have came to me because that wouldn't have happened if you'd have come talk to me first. He says, so from now on, you come see me before you run your mouth on me and this stuff. Yeah. And then we went back there in June, and I told the guys that owned the car, I said, I'm never going to run a fast lap the whole time on this deal. I'm just going to pick different parts. I said, we're not going to show them what we have here. And they would go time me in different parts. And they said, you're out running it, guys, everywhere you're running hard. And it come time to qualify, and they didn't mess with us. And we qualified right behind Earnhardt. And this Jake Elder was his crew chief, and he comes over to me and he says, you know, you outrun us qualifying. He says, but they're not going to give it to you. I said, why would they do something like that? He says, because they don't want you back east running the Busch Clash. And he says, you outrun us 0.3 of a second. And I had other people that had us on the stopwatch. And about 5 more cars qualified. They finally announced my time, and Jake walked over to me. He says, told you, right? I told you what was going to happen. I said, I don't care. I'm starting on the outside of the front row next to Earnhardt. So that's good enough.
He was in his Wrangler car?
No, he was driving for that Australian at the time. This was in 79. 79. He was running for rookie of the year of 79.
And the Clash back then, if you got the pole of a race, you went to the Clash.
Yeah, he got invited back to the Clash at Daytona.
They didn't want no Westerner.
That's kind of what I was led to believe.
So back up a little bit, because to me, this would be probably one of your best moments. Do you remember the 77 Datsun 200 at the Datsun 200 at Riverside? It was actually a USAC sanctioned race.
That was in Ontario.
Ontario.
Yeah.
How did that race go?
Well, I wound up winning that. And I got to race with AJ Foyt all day in that race. We run nose to tail the whole race. And he had a flat tire with just a lap or two to go. And then I beat Bobby Allison by the length of the front fender. Bobby Unser to the length of the front fender back to the finish line and won that race.
So you're kind of being humble about that, because you guys, I was at that race, and I remember my mom probably spilling her Falstaff beer everywhere and smoking 4 packs of cigarettes. And you qualified second. Foyt qualified P1, you qualified P2, and Unser qualified P3. But you and Unser, for the last 4 laps of that race, traded the lead eight times. It looked like the Chastain win this weekend on the road course.
Yeah, it was quite a race. And then it come down to, we took the white flag, and I think he was leading it, and I passed him going into turn 1. And we got down to turn 3, and I was on the outside. I seen a lap car coming in it was down there in turn 3, and it was a guy named Jack Simpson that used to race at Saugus. And we split him down there between 3 and 4. I was on the outside, and Unser was on the inside, and I beat him back to the finish line to win the race.
Did they like you after that, Jimmy?
Well, I always got along with those guys. I mean, I talked to Bobby Unser a few times on the phone after that. He called and we talked. I mean, he was just like just any other guy, that you'd ever want to meet. Those guys were great guys.
Right.
Once you get to know them a little bit, and they knew they could trust you to race with them.
It was more the officials, I think, that had the NASCAR didn't want the thing. But I mean, when you think about that, Foyt's won a Daytona 500 and an Indy 500, and Unser's won an Indy 500, and you just yanked him up. You just shove it right through the middle and said, "Here we go, boys. You're on the West Coast now."
Well, I drove that car I was driving at that race belonged to Tom Hamilton. They own Stock Car Products, and we had a West Coast race there the year before. I think it was a West Coast 250 race, and it was a NASCAR race, and he had LD Ottinger come out and drive the car for him. And so we're running there together all day long, and my car didn't have the slick nose on it that his car had, so I had to draft them to stay up with them. And it gets down to the end, and we came in, they had a yellow flag with just a few laps to go, and I came in to get I bounced the car off the fence because I was drafting, I was third in line. And all of a sudden, the 2 front cars, Herschel McGriff and Ottinger, split this car. Well, I'm seeing this car right in front of me sideways. And I jumped on the brakes and bounced the thing up into the fence and got the fenders into the tires on the right side. We came down the pit road and put 2 new tires on. And when they went to line back up, well, the lap cars had to go down on the inside. Well, I got to go all the way back up the outside behind Ottinger. And they didn't put tires on. So I was able to run with him then. And every time coming off the corner, he would jerk the steering wheel because his car was pushing. And the last lap coming to the checkered flag, his car started pushing the front end. And I was able to get up alongside of him and beat him by about length of the front fender again. And that Tom Hamilton, he always took care of us with all the chassis parts and suspension parts and everything for years and years and years. And it come time for that USAC race. And somebody asked Tom, how come you're having him drive the car? And he says, he beat me here last year. He said, I'm not going to have that again. He's going to drive my car. And then we won that USAC race.
That's awesome.
It was fun because Roger Penske, he was such a nice guy. And I had met him at Riverside one time and during this Permatex race. And he comes over to me before qualifying and he says, so how you running? I said, we're running pretty good. He says, you think you can beat that orange car? And I said, well, we're going to give it our best, see what happens. And after qualifying, he comes over and says, how'd you do? And I said, I'm only second to him. And he goes, well, just make up for it tomorrow then. And then he come over and congratulated me after the race was over that I'd won the race. Come over, shook my hand.
That's awesome.
Quite a feat to have those guys come and talk to you like him, especially him.
Absolutely. So in 73, Jimmy, you make a trek to British Columbia on a road course.
Yeah.
You never seen the track, and you click off fast time.
Well, that used to be part of the West Series up there. It was called Westwood, BC. It was up on the top of a gravel quarry, up on top of a mountain, and went up there. The West cars went up there for a race. I mean, it was on our schedule. It's like we went to see the night before that. We went to Langley or over to Victoria, British Columbia, over on the island, and we had to come back here and change the cars over to come run that road race the next day.
And you put the car on the pole that day. You were fast time.
Yeah. Well, I always liked the road courses. I always did good on the road courses. Like in 78, the first time that I ever ran Sears Point, driving for that Lakes Drywall. And we go there, and they used to run straight up the drag strip. They didn't use the mountain part of the course.
Mm-hmm.
And we go up that drag strip, and I mean, we were going up the top. They had a radar gun up there. We were going 145 miles an hour up there, and then come back down through the S's. And the third lap on the racetrack, I slid the thing off the corner of turn 10 and hit the tire wall, got the car upside down. And we took it over to this guy, another guy that was at Saugus for years, named Tony Odo. He lived in Fairfield, California. So we took the car over there, and the car wasn't all that bad. You know, I mean, the body looked terrible and all that. We fixed the thing, put a new front fender on it, and had to change an A-frame, I think, on it, kick the roof back up so we get the windows back in it. And we go out there. That was on a Friday. We go out Saturday to practice, and we found out when we fixing the thing what caused the whole problem is the guy had put too short a shock on the right front, and it would pull the tire off the ground going through that turn 10, and it would push. So we go up there Saturday for the qualifying, and the thing is it's missing. It's not running good. Something happened to the wiring when it got upside down, I guess. And there was another guy there named Timmy Williamson that he died at Riverside a couple of years later. And we went there, and he gave us a Chevrolet ignition to put in the car. And I only qualified like 18th, I think. And then Sunday morning, they had a little practice. We went out to that practice, and we put that ignition in the car. And we were like almost a full second faster than the guy. I don't remember who was on the pole, but we were almost like a full second faster. And it only took me like 11 laps to get the lead and won the race. And I got a picture of that car sitting in Victory Lane up there with the roof all pushed down on it. And the car looked terrible, but we won the race.
Lucky they didn't have templates.
Yeah, it was quite a deal. And those guys took that car all the way back to Tacoma, Washington, because we had a week and a half before we had to be at the Orange Show for another race. And they put a whole new body on that car and brought it back to Orange Show for that following week.
Man,
so that guy, they wanted to race as bad as I did at the time.
Now, Jim, you mentioned a lot about the road courses, and one of the road courses on the West Coast that maybe didn't take off as much as people thought was Willow Springs. Was that pretty prominent at all back in the day, or?
You know, I can remember. I never ran a race there because they always figured the place was too far out in the desert, that they wouldn't draw any people. What I always heard, and we used to go out there and do a lot of testing. There was some Trans Am teams from in the valley here and this Dennis Fisher did my motors for years, and he did the motors in these Trans Am cars. Well, they want to go test at Willow Springs. So I got to go up there and test for them a lot.
Oh, okay.
So I got to run that thing quite a bit, but I never did a race. They had a race there in 63 or something like that for Saugus cars, and they never went back.
Interesting. Now, in your time, either there or throughout your travels, did you ever run into anybody like, you know, Carroll Shelby or anybody like that?
I never met him, but we used to do a lot of dealing with he owned the Goodyear dealership for the West Coast for the race tires.
Mm-hmm.
And the guys that worked there named J.L. Henderson and Miles Winchester, they were the guys that you went to when you needed tires and stuff.
Ah.
I can remember one night after we had a race at Ascot that Shelby put on a chili cook-off deal at this place down there in Gardena, and he invited all the racers over there. And he was there cooking the chili.
Oh, that's awesome.
He was big on that chili, selling that for a long time.
Now, my Uncle Rick touched on something too that I want to talk about with you is you went up to British Columbia. You never saw the track. You ran the fastest time. So I'm always curious when I speak to people who have raced, but in your mind and according to you, to Jimmy Insolo, how can you describe the perfect lap?
I don't know that it ever made a perfect lap.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think so. I think there's always room to improve it. You know, because you can always step back because like at Riverside, you had 9 chances to make a mistake, and you could always go back and figure someplace that you thought you could have went faster. Now, whether you would have or not, I don't know. It's like we used to take the Camaros down there. We ran at Saugus. They'd run those Saturday races at Riverside, and we were like 3 or 4 seconds faster than the Cup cars.
Oh.
And the NASCAR didn't like that. They didn't like those Saturday race cars going faster than the other ones. But we were running 190 miles an hour down that back straightaway with those Camaros. And those Cup cars were probably running 170, 175. And like that guy I told you about, that Gazaway, he come to me because I always ran both races, Saturday and Sunday. And he came to me one time. I was down there working on my Camaro. And he goes, "What makes you want to drive that thing?" I said, "You just don't understand how fun that thing is coming down that straightaway, going that fast, and having it just go around the corner so much easier than those Cup cars do."
Were you ever scared at any point on any track anywhere?
No, not that I can remember. I just, you didn't have time to be scared. It's you were there for a reason. It's just. I never had that sensation cross my mind, I guess.
When you were doing that speed down the back chute in your Camaro, were those the wedge bodies by then, or just the stock
No,
motors?
they were still. It looked like a Camaro. They still look like the cars we ran at Saugus. They look like Camaros,
Did you ever run a wedge body like your later 38, which is the most beautiful car in the world? That stock car, I imagine that was a stock car products chassis.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, I remember closing my eyes. I remember when you brought that car out to Saugus, and I closed my eyes, and you knew when that car was coming by for price. It had a different sound, and oh God, I'm gonna drool on myself. That was the most spectacular car I've ever seen.
It had 180-degree headers on it.
That's why.
It
just had that whine.
It sounded like a 4-cylinder instead of a V8.
And that had a Fisher motor in it, probably, right?
Yeah. Fisher started doing my motors in probably the middle 70s, and he did them from then on. We just became friends. I was introduced to him by Jerry Weaver from Weaver Brothers, and Longacre had done my motors, and then he started not getting things done when they were supposed to be done. And Jerry Weaver introduced me to Dennis Fisher, and he had a shop about the size of a 2-car garage over there in Van Nuys. And he was sitting there not doing anything, and I wasn't happy. He introduced us, and he came over. And we talked for about 10 minutes. We made a deal, and he built my motors until the day I quit racing.
And he did a lot of motors for East Coast guys too, didn't he?
He started doing that when he got well known. Because he did my motors, he did Sonny Easley's motors, and he did Timmy Williamson's motors. And when those guys would see how hard those motors run, then they would buy Earnhardt Senior bought motors from me for Hornaday's truck series. He had to do the motors for that, and Earnhardt ran some of his motors when he ran the Busch cars.
Interesting. And didn't Fisher have some six bangers that they tried for a while?
Yeah, he built a lot of V6s. I never had one of those. But one thing he did get involved with the V6 deals was those Indy cars, those V6 turbocharged Indy cars. he was doing the motors for those back there when they set the track record. I think one of the cars still holds the track record back there with his motor in it. But they could never get them to last. They made too much horsepower. They used to break themselves all the time.
Interesting. So another kind of interesting little tidbit that I found out about, I wanted to ask you about, is San Gabriel Valley Speedway 605?
Yeah.
And I heard from True about San Jose Speedway. I'd never heard about that before. You guys made a couple treks up there.
Yeah, I went there. I only went there one time with the West and West cars. I think it was like 1970 that we went there. That was the only time I ever went there.
And Manzanita, was it a lot less like, it was dirt half mile? Was it a lot like Ascot?
Yeah, pretty much, except where the starter stood. About the only light on the whole racetrack was I used to say it had a 60-watt light bulb hanging over the starter's head that was the only light of the whole racetrack. We used to go there. We used to go there and race Saturday night, and then we'd go to Tucson. Used to be dirt too, and we would go over there. We'd go to Manzanita. And then the next night we would go run Tucson on Sunday night, and then we would come home so we could get home in time to go to work Monday morning.
Yeah, you guys were just ridiculous back then, and the guys you race with too. I mean, it's interesting to me, and we're on a big push right now. I mean, there's a West Coast Hall of Fame, and then there's, the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Well, the only guy, there's nobody from the roots of NASCAR on the West Coast. It's hard to follow because every time they change the NASCAR name, they change your guy's old name. It's, it goes, and then they took away your intermingled races, and then they gave them back and made, so your finishes don't look as good as they should be because they lump you in with the Cup guys. It's kind of a mess. But when you talk about guys like you and Ray Elder and McGriff, and McCoy and Knoll, don't you think those guys belong in the NASCAR Hall of Fame?
I think probably Herschel does and Ray Elder. I don't know about anybody else, because Herschel was the whole start of that whole deal. When Bill France first started that deal, I guess. I don't know all the history back then. All I know is stories, and I've talked to Herschel some because became good friends with Herschel when I was racing the West, because he always raced. And he's such a great guy. He's just one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet. And Ray Elder was too. And, when I first seen those guys, when they come to Saugus way back when, I used to think, boy, these guys, I could race with those guys any day. It was like Dick Bowen and Carl Joyner and all those people from up there. And then when you started racing with them, you found out these guys are pretty good race car drivers. They know what it's all about. And I mean, it don't take you long to learn the lessons from those guys. They knew how to make their cars last 150 laps, and we would go out there and just I'd run my car into the ground, and go, how do these guys keep doing this? Well, they'd done it long enough. They knew how to do it. They were all good race car drivers.
So you think McGriff and Elder for sure belong in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. What makes you think that they're not there? Like, what do you think that's all about?
I don't know what the deal is. I don't know why, especially with Ray, because he won two of the West Coast race. I mean, the Riverside races
against the big guys. Yeah.
Yeah. And he, in my opinion, he deserves to be there.
Yeah. So,
like there used to be a guy, he was a kind of a local guy from Portland. His name was Carl Joyner. One of his grandsons was Matt Crafton's crew chief on his truck.
Junior Joyner, right?
Yeah. Well, it was Carl's. I don't remember what he is but Carl's boy, Junior Joyner is his boy, and his dad. I used to talk to his dad all the time, Carl, up there in Portland, and we used to go to the Speedway up there and race, and it was a drive-in theater at the time. Still had the movie screen on the back straightaway, and had all the speaker stands in the infield. And we'd run early afternoon shows, and we'd have to get out of there so they could open it up and let the people in for the movie.
Come on.
No, it had no crash walls except down the front straightaway. And in the one corner, it was all these blackberry bushes. And this one guy, George, I can't remember his last name now. Anyway, he disappeared from the racetrack during the race. They finally figured out he'd turned around backwards and went into those blackberry bushes. So they had to stop the race so the tow truck could back up there because those blackberry bushes had big long thorns on them, and he couldn't get out of the car. So the tow truck guy had to get in there, put a cable on, pull the car out of the bushes so he could get out of the car
because of the thorns.
Yeah, and then that guy Carl Joyner, we went there to practice one Saturday because I'd never been there, and I'm sailing this thing into the corner as hard as I could, lap after lap, and he walks over to me, and I had met him, but I didn't know him real well. And he looks at me and he goes, boy, he says, if you'd let off the gas a little bit sooner, instead of driving the thing in the corner so far, he said, you'd probably go faster. And so I said, so where do I supposed to let off the thing, Well, there was a telephone pole going into turn one. He says, let off it there. And then down the back straightaway, he says, at the end of the movie screen, let off of it there. And I walked over to that Roger Paquette that owned the car with me. And I says, that old guy's trying to tell me how to get around this racetrack. I says, I think he's scared. He don't want to drive it in the corner. So I went out there and was running again. I ran about 4 or 5 laps. And I says, I'm going to let off the thing where he told me just see. And I came back in. That guy, Roger, says, I don't know what you did there at the end. He says, but you picked up a half a second. I said, maybe this old guy knows more than I think he knows.
That's a hard lesson to learn because in my street stock at Saugus, we just drove it all the way into the corner as far as we could. But when I got into my sportsman car, if I drove it like a street stock, I would have ran guys over going into the corner. And then certainly when you get to Irwindale or Mesa Marin or any of those tracks, it was, what do they say? In for show, out for dough. I mean, it's you see the cup cars, a lot of those guys rolling out way early and they get on the gas early. And so another track that was interesting to me, I think it's downtown Sacramento now. There's restaurants there and everything, was the California State Fairgrounds.
That was a mile dirt.
A mile dirt.
Yeah, it was that. They used to run horse races there. And every year they would run a West race there. I only ran there once, and then they stopped going there. Used to go up there and watch Hornaday Sr. and Don Knoll and Eddie Gray and all those guys. They're racing. It was amazing to watch them on that mile dirt.
They were probably hauled on that. And so it's interesting because you raced there in May of 70, you finished 14th. In October of 70, they call it Black Sunday. There were 3 deaths on that track, and they closed the track right after that.
I don't remember that.
What do you think would have been treacherous? The no walls, the speed?
Well, what they had is it was a horse race track, and they had a 3-panel board fence around the outside of it. And sometimes when they'd hit that, there was nothing. I mean, there was no strength. It's just like 1x6 boards. And those boards would shatter and come through the car. And I remember Hornaday Sr. one time there, he wound up going through the fence, and he wound up in this concession stand out there. Luckily, there was nobody in the concession stand, but the car wound up in the concession stand, and they were going to leave it there, and they pulled the car out, and somebody else went in there right behind him.
Oh, wow.
It's when he used to drive for Galpin Ford when they had their West cars. Yeah. And I mean, he wound up right in that concession stand. If it had been open, he would have killed everybody in the thing, probably.
I always worried about that at Saugus in the figure 8 when we would come around turns, I guess you'd call them 1 and 2 in the 8, and then you come, and there was that opening between the front stretch and the turn 4 grandstands, and there was a concession stand right outside. And I remember guys breaking ball joints and stuff and aiming for that opening, but nobody ever went through that chain link fence right there. Thank goodness. So this was something I learned today. And so in 1971, you ran 28 races. Okay. And there was a span between July 2nd and July 31st where if you didn't come home, in other words, if you just went from track to track to track and didn't come back here, you would have traveled 4,100 miles in 70 hours just to jump from track to track to track if you didn't come back home. What did you guys used to do? I mean, you went, there's a stretch in here on July 2nd, a Friday, Spanaway. Then Sunday you went to Skagit, and then you went to Umatilla, Portland, Langley, British Columbia, Rogue Valley. Then you went to Oregon, and then you went to Idaho, came back home to Vegas and Orange Show.
Well, we used to have at least a week in between some of them races, but when we used to go up north there on some of those trips, we would run 9 races in 3 weeks, just up there.
And did you stay up there and jump, or did you tell me you didn't come back home and go back?
No, we stayed up there. We had friends that lived outside of Portland that we would stay with, and they had room for us to park the truck and room for us to stay with them in their house. And then my wife's sister lived just south of Seattle, and we would stay with her when we were up in that part of the country.
That is a tough schedule.
Right down the road from those people, from her sister was a guy named Fred Lang, and he would travel with Ray Elder a lot. Well, he had a great big house and a great big yard, and all them other guys would park their haulers in his backyard, and they would pitch in money and go buy all the food, and he put in big hot water heaters so they could all shower and the whole deal. I mean, it was quite a deal. Luckily for me, we were like 20 blocks up the road at my wife's sister's, but we'd go down there and sit there and during the day, and everybody would help everybody work on the race cars.
That's great. So the Pacific Northwest was alive and well with NASCAR and stock car racing. It's not so much today. A lot of those tracks are closed, but back then, I mean, you guys spent a whole week up there and boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, like I said, we ran a lot of races up there. Even when I drove for that guy Craker in '78 when I won the championship, I think we ran 22 races that year.
Yeah, yes, you
and
did.
I would come home. I had a deal working with them because I was running my own car at Saugus and Mason Moran a lot. And if they had a big race at home here, we might go up there and race on a Friday night. So I'd fly up to Seattle and he'd pick me up at the airport. We'd go race. And then Saturday morning, I'd fly home and go race my own car at Saugus or Mason Moran, then fly back up there and race Sunday again. And then fly home Sunday night so I could go to work.
You know, we've asked, Brandon loves asking this question, what makes a good race car driver? And you can hear it with you too. It's passion and heart, because if you don't have passion and heart, you're not just making the trek you just talked about.
Yeah, well, it just, you had to have the desire to do it. And the guys that owned the car with me and stuff, we all had that same desire, and it was to win races, and I mean, it sometimes when we wreck that car, we'd come home, we'd work all night, every night of the week to get that car fixed, put front frame clips on it and everything. So we could go back to Bakersfield the next Saturday night. We had to be there. I don't know what made it. And none of us got paid for doing it, but it was just the desire to do it.
What race are you most proud of?
I think that Permatex race that I won at Riverside in '74 or '5 when I beat Bobby Allison.
Why?
That was the first big race I ever won. And especially against somebody like him. And then for him to come over and shake hands with you afterwards, tell you that was the most fun he ever had in a race car in his life. It was just the way it was.
What about
then sometimes like when I was driving for that drywall deal, and I put the car on the outside of the front row at Riverside. That guy Leon that worked on my car, his daughter was going to get married on a Saturday, so I couldn't be there at Riverside to practice the car before the race on Sunday. And somehow, I don't know how they managed to do it, they got Richard Petty to take that car out and drive it at the last practice on Saturday afternoon. And I got back down there the next morning, and Richard was standing at the gate to the pits and says, "I need to talk to you." And I didn't know he had been in the car. And he says, "I took your car out practice it yesterday afternoon." He said, "I never realized that car had power steering on it until I come through the back. He said, when I got in it, the motor was running. And how they got him to get in the car, I don't know, because he didn't do that kind of stuff. And he said, I went out there and I ran a couple laps. And he said, I shut the thing off when I come through the back gate. He said, that was the first time I realized it had power steering. And he said, I need that guy's name to get that power steering. So I gave him Tom Lee's phone number and stuff. And he bought some stuff. And he said, I like the way the brake pedal and stuff's in this car. And that came from Tom Hamilton at Stock Car Products. He had made the deal with a balance bar and all that stuff. And we were one of the few that had that in the car. And then the car broke and I didn't get to finish the race. And I was getting ready to go home. That I had my helmet bag in my hand. And there was a guy that worked for STP that was always with Richard. His name was Ralph Salvino. And he says, I've been looking all over the place for you. And I said, what are you looking for me for? He said, you need to get in Richard's car. He's sick. He doesn't feel good. And so I went and changed my clothes real quick in a hurry, you know, and this friend of mine was in there and he goes, where are you going? I said, they tell me they want me to get in Richard's car and finish the race for him. I said, I hope somebody's not messing with me. And I went running out there to the pit road and Dale Inman, his cousin, grabs me and says, Richard's sick. He said, we're going to put you in the car. And he said, I'm telling you, he says, the battery's dead. And this switch, you got to turn this switch on and that switch off. And I'm going, boy, I sure hope I don't turn the wrong switch off. And when he got done, Maurice Petty, his brother, gets a hold of me and he says, don't worry about none of that stuff he just told you. He says, get in it and drive it. And he says, there's only two things that can happen. Either it's going to finish or it's going to blow up. He said, so don't worry. Just treat it like it was yours. And all of a sudden, here Richard comes down the pit road, and I went around the back of the car, and Richard fell on the ground. I almost stepped on him. And Kyle was the jack man. And I get in the car, get up on the jack and get in the car. And Kyle's almost inside the car with me trying to help me get the belts up. Everybody made a big deal about that, but the car fit pretty good. And I wound up, he was running fourth when I got in the car. And I wound up passing Cale Yarborough and I finished third. I ran the last 20 laps of the race. And I got a picture of when I came in the back gate, Richard standing there with these wet rags, handing them to me because this car had a broken header in it. It was blowing the exhaust up through the car. And he said, I bet you could use this about right now, couldn't you? And I said, boy, if they'd have told me there's another 10 laps to go, you'd have been back in the car. He said, no, we'd have had to park it. He says, I'd already had my punishment for the day. And when they get all done, Maurice says, we'll be sending you a check. I said, you don't owe me nothing. I said, it's just the idea that I got to drive Richard's car. You know, I was even asked to do it. And they said, well, there wasn't anybody else there we were going to put in it. And they figured out what it paid for finishing third in the 20 laps I ran, and they sent me a check for the 50% of what the car made for those 20 laps. And they took me up to the press box, and I felt like a real hero. Here's Bobby Allison sitting there. He'd won the race. And they were talking to me like I'd won the race. And all I did was take over for Richard the last 20 laps. I tell people that's my claim to fame. I got to drive his car.
That's crazy.
Then at like the end of 78 there, we were trying to win the championship on the West Coast of that drywall car. And we were in Ontario. And for some reason, I don't know how we did it, but we didn't make the race. And we're sitting there at dinner that night, and Earnhardt was driving for that Osterlin band. And back then they had a rule that if they had 6 starts, I think it was, they wouldn't be eligible for rookie the next year. Well, if Earnhardt would have started that race, he would have had too many starts, and he couldn't have run for rookie in 79. Well, this guy, I never forget the guy's name. They called him Frog. He come over and sitting at dinner, and he goes, you know, we've been talking about this deal, and we decided that we need you and you need us. And I said, what's this for? He said, we need you to start Earnhardt's car tomorrow at Ontario. And he says, because whoever the starting driver got the points. And they said, on the first yellow flag, we want you to pit. And we're going to put Earnhardt in the car so he can get the practice at this racetrack before we come back here next year. And I ran like 16 laps, and I came in, and I got a picture somewhere of me getting out of the car on the right side. And he got in it, and the rundown of the finishing order, he finished 7th, but it's got my name for finishing 7th in that race. And Earnhardt says to me, he says, you know, there's a catch to this whole deal. I said, what is that? He said, when we go to Riverside, you got to take me around the racetrack and give me some lessons. I said, I can handle that part of it.
That's first of all, I've never been able to get out of a race car on the right-hand side.
Well, they didn't have these cars, those old cars were wide open, and they didn't have all those roll bars and stuff in them. They had
right. But so the pet, there's a couple of things on the Petty thing, and one is he's a lot taller than you.
Well, that's what everybody kept saying, you know, I mean, about the big deal about how to reach the pedals and stuff. But he had the seat so close to the steering wheel that it was, I mean, you sat like it was right up against you, and it was, the seat was perfect to reach the pedals. And what he did is he would drive the car with his legs spread out way out in the car. And he had the gear shift bent way over. So when you get in the car, I mean, you had to reach way over to put a third gear for me. Right. But his knees were hanging out there. So that's what he had to do.
I remember he was an up on the wheel guy. Now that you mention it. And of course they had those, you guys all had those really nice wraparound road course seats that held your helmet up and
yeah, like right.
all that. I mean,
we had fiberglass seats back then. They had no side support in them or anything.
Nothing.
We used to wear, when we go to, I finally learned to run a strap on my helmet because as I got older, I couldn't hold my head up in them long races.
How many concussions do you think you had?
How many what?
How many concussions do you think you had?
I don't know that I ever had any.
Jimmy Insolo, he never wrecked.
Yeah, well, I did. I hit every wall and every racetrack there ever was.
Oh, I never saw you. I never saw you lay a bumper on anybody. Now, maybe it's years of my mom brainwashing me. I mean, you're not Orrin Prosser.
Well, right? I had the reputation of being kind of rough at times. I had some good teachers back then. There was a guy that raced over here named Marvin Hines. He taught me more dirty lessons than you could ever imagine. He took a liking to me and he says, "This is how you do things." And you could move people and they didn't even know you moved them. So let's go back to 79, because I mean, you're a humble guy, you're taking that lightly, but in 79, another amazing thing happened. And that is that Petty won his 7th championship over Waltrip by 11 points. And the finishing order at Riverside in 79 was Bobby Allison, Darrell Waltrip, and Jimmy Insolo. Well, I said Richard Petty on the rundown.
Had Jimmy Insolo not finished 3rd in that race, Petty would not have won his 7th championship.
I don't know how the points worked, and I can't remember how they did.
That's the way we're going to put it down in history, right there. We're not going to research it. I'm really good at BS and stuff, Jimmy, so people will believe me if I say it, right? So we're just going to say that you pushed him to his 7th championship because you're Jimmy Insolo.
People ask me what was the deal. That's one of the deals that I got to get in his car. That I says that's my whole claim to fame. I got to get in Richard Petty's car, and they said, "Well, what was different about it from your own car?" And I says, once you sat out on the car, there was really no difference. I said, except on the door, it said 43, and on another spot on the door, it said Richard Petty, and I got to drive the car.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because technically also, I mean, we were asking Sedgwick this question the other night because he was really good in the West cars and didn't really do well in the Tour cars. And we asked him, why so well in the West car, but not the Tour car? And he said he was a sloppy driver and that the bigger cars, which we know that's not true about him, but he's a humble guy too. He said the bigger cars weren't as precise as the Tour cars and the cars like the Pacific Coast cars that you guys drove. And they were a lot more precise with their suspension changes and everything. So it must have been, I mean, half the kids today, if they had to run that big old Dodge you run in a Mercury. I don't know how anybody ever won a race in a Mercury, but Jimmy Insolo did.
No, I never drove a Mercury. I never drove a Mercury.
They put it down as a Mercury, so you should just take advantage. Just BS them on that one too, Jimmy. Right? But some of these kids today, I mean, 70, 80 pounds soaking wet, if they had to drive a car around any track without power steering, and you talked about Petty turning it off and then realized it's one thing to drive a car with manual steering, but when you turn off the car with power steering, that's like twice as hard as having manual steering.
Yeah.
These kids would cry and run home.
We had problems a couple of times there with breaking a belt on the power steering. And we were at Ascot one time for a 100-lap race in the West cars. And right at the start of the race, the thing broke the power steering belt. And Elder was leading the race, and about 50 laps, I mean, the thing would jump through the ruts, and that's all I could do to jerk it out of the ruts to steer it. And my guy on the radio says, "So you think you can pass him?" I said, "You know what, this thing, the power steering's not working on this thing." I says, "I'm doing all I can do to finish second, so that's what we're going to have to settle for tonight." I says, I'm afraid I would wreck him and myself if I got up there and tried to drive by with power steering not working.
That must have been tough. So we're going to wrap this up, Jimmy. I saw something else that was kind of cool. You jumped in a super modified at Saugus in 1986.
Yeah.
That's true, or are we going to BS this one too?
No, that's a true story.
Okay, so let me just lay the foundation for this. A West car at Saugus did a lap of about 17 seconds.
I don't know if they were that fast back then.
1770. And a super modified did a 1440. Now, I remember at Saugus, we sat right up on that fence right there with the race in our face, which was a great experience. And I remember sitting on a lawn chair in the pits, either to the left of the scoreboard or the right of the scoreboard. And I remember standing there in turn one. The first time I ever saw a super modified came down the straightaway, I turned around and ran to the blockhouse because I thought the guy stuck his throttle. And what was it like to drive a super modified?
It was a eye-opening experience. I went over there one Saturday night just to watch, and this friend of mine, John Riles, that raced those in sprint cars, he was there with a guy named Wally Pancratz. And I'm sure you know that, recognize that name.
Yep.
Well, he introduced me to Wally. And he asked me, "Have you ever driven one of these?" And I said, "No." I said, "Never had the chance." He said, "Would you be interested?" Well, figured nothing would ever come of it. I said, "Yeah, sure. It'd be fun to kind of maybe get in one of those." And he said, "Well, let me talk to my car owner." He drove for a guy named Clyde Prickett from Fresno. He was an old-time racer from the Central Valley up there. And Wally says, "I'll call you on Monday." Well, he calls me and he says, "Yeah, the car owner said he'd be glad to bring the second car down there for you." And I'm going, "Oh man, what did I do to myself here now?" And my wife was having a fit because she didn't want me in that car. And so time went on, and I didn't hear anything. And one Saturday night, I was over there at Saugus just watching again, and I ran into Ray Wilkins. And I said, "Did you ever hear anything from them guys?" Because that modified race was the following week. And he goes, "Yeah, matter of fact, I just got an entry blank today. It's got your name on it." And I'm thinking, this isn't good. But I couldn't back out of it then. And I went over there they had a practice on Friday night. I mean, I'd never been in one of those cars. I didn't know how it started. I didn't know anything about it. And they put me in it, and they said, "Okay," they said, "when we start to push you from here," it says, "put it in gear." And it was just a direct drive, and the drive shaft ran down alongside your left leg because the engine was hanging out the left side of the car. And he says, "When the oil pressure comes up, turn the magneto switch on and it'll fire up." Well, that was my first experience of getting the thing started. And then you couldn't stop to go out onto the racetrack. You had to just keep going through the gate over there. And they had, I don't remember how many cars they had there, but it was a USAC national race. And I qualified, I think I qualified 9th. And that put me in the main event. And I finished 8th in the main event. And the guy says to me, he says, "How'd you like to go to Mesa Marin and drive it where it acts like a real race car?" And I said, "No, I think I started tonight and I retired tonight. I think this is enough for me." And he said, would you consider going to Phoenix in the Copper World?
Oh, hell no.
I said, no, I seen a couple of them get out of the racetrack up there, go clear up on the mountain over there. And I said, I don't need no part of that.
I saw some fly up on Rattlesnake Hill there. I mean, oh,
Yeah.
my good. At Mesa Marin, actually, got one of the Bettenhausen kids up there. I remember passed away
They
at
got the
Mesa.
Vukovic kid.
Vukovic kid.
Billy Vukovic the third. They killed 2 guys up there in the super modifieds.
Now, Vukovic was in this race at Saugus. It was probably his dad, though, right?
Yeah. It was Vukovic the third there. He was on the pole. He had fast time.
So in that race, you did finish 8th. Bettenhausen won. There's an Indy 500 guy. Vukovic, 16th, Indy 500 guy. And George Snyder, 21st, an Indy 500 guy. How much practice did you get in that car, Jimmy?
We practiced over there Friday night, and then they had another practice Saturday before we qualified. And it was crazy because I held the track record in the stock cars over there at that time at a 15:57. And we go over there and we're practicing at 1480 in that modified. And I got somewhat used to the car, and they put 2 new rear tires on the car because Ray Wilkins, he bought the tires and the fuel for him. And he told me, he says, I guarantee you this will put 500 people in the grandstands when I put it in the paper, you're going to be here.
Yeah.
And then he told me this Saturday, he said, if you don't want to do this, he said, you don't have to do this. And I said, well, I got my foot in my mouth now. I said, I can't back out now that you've advertised this deal. And he goes, it's no big deal to me. He says, and I said, I'm going to do it just so I can say I did it. Well, they put 2 new rear tires on the car. And I went out there and I practiced on 1440. I was equaling fast time for Vukovic. And they said, well, we're going to put a new right front tire on the thing. Well, then it pushed so bad qualifying, it only went 1480. But it was an experience to open the throttle on that thing down the straightaway, because you come around the next lap and you can see the black tire marks that left down the straightaway.
Yeah, they were just ridiculous. And I remember seeing them race at Mesa. I was at the Vukovic race at Mesa when that happened. And I remember seeing Davey Hamilton clicking off laps at the Copper World Classic at Phoenix. And I don't know what they do down the chute there, but they sure fly in the corners, boy.
They would have been, they probably could have qualified for the IndyCar race back there at that time over there at Phoenix. Because they were probably, I think the fast time that time was almost 160 miles an hour average for them qualifying.
That's crazy.
We had those wedge cars, we ran them over there. We didn't know what we had, with all the Subi bodies and all that. But Thurkettle would have, he qualified at 136 one time, and I qualified at 135 something. And it was just amazing. Then you go back and drive them old style cars with the square bodies on them, and you're running 130 miles an hour. It just don't make sense.
Right. Yeah, the wedge bodies were really nice. And you finished up your career doing some training. I remember seeing you working with Flying Brian Germoni, right?
Yeah, I tried to help him.
Yeah, a lot of those guys became spotters and crew chiefs. And
the guy I had the most fun working with, trying to help him, was Sean Monroe. That guy, he would do anything you ask him to do in that race car. And he goes, well, you think it'll work? Well, we don't know, but you're going to try it. And he would do it. And we were over there at Tucson at that winter heat one time. And Hornaday used to be there. And we're standing there, and they had 70 cars show up for that winter heat because it was TV race and all that.
Right.
We're only practicing about probably 10th fast out all them cars. And I told Monroe, I says, you better drive that thing down the corner after you get one lap in, because otherwise we're going to be loading up going home. So you better drive it in there. The second lap, he drove that thing in there. Me and Hornaday turned around, looked the other way, because we looked at each other, said, I don't think he's coming back. And he qualified second fast. And he finished second in the main event that day. And I asked him after he drove the thing in the corner qualifying, I said, so what did it do when you got down there? He goes, it just went down there and turned. He said, so now I know I can do it every lap. He said, all it takes is you to give me the confidence that I can do it.
How did you get roped in with Sean Monroe? That's like a grandpa trying to teach his.
He was such a great guy. It's just unbelievable. He was not the guy that you saw on TV.
No, and he
No.
had mellowed by then. He did. He. I think he matured a little bit at Saugus, and he was a good, fun kid to be around. And
Well, Roger that owned my car owned a rear end shop, and they gave him the rear ends for his car. The place was called Ramjet Rear Ends.
yes,
And Gordy that owned Stick Only. They're the ones that got me connected with him.
gotcha.
And I mean, he was so much fun to be around.
Yeah,
It
he
was
was
just
a good
amazing.
kid.
When he would get away from everybody else, it was just amazing what kind of person he was. I mean,
Yeah.
smart.
Yep.
And they, like we were over there at that winter heat, and that's the first time any of us, I think, had ever seen Greg Biffle. He came down from Vancouver, Washington to run that race. And nobody could run with him. And he's leading the race, and Monroe's running second. And on the yellow flag, Hornaday gets on the radio to him and says, "Run up there and run to the back of him." He goes, "Why would I want to do that? We're on a yellow flag." He said, "You'll probably never get another chance to run into him. So you better go up there." So Monroe went up there and run into him on the yellow flag.
That's so Hornaday,
Yeah.
So
We were getting a big laugh out of that. We're sitting there watching him do it.
well, Jimmy, this has been a surreal experience for me, and I know you lost your lovely wife here recently, and I'm sure she and my mom were probably sitting up there right now watching us do this, and having a good laugh along with us. And my mom sure loved you, and this is a surreal experience, and I got to thank Karen and Pat Jr. for setting this up, and we appreciate you and appreciate what you've done for our sport, and appreciate you coming on and sharing your time and your stories with us.
Okay. Now, it's been fun sitting here talking about it. It brings back a lot of memories. A lot of people that taught me a lot of things. And I never forget those people,
Saugus was great for that. One of the guys that taught me a lot of Saugus is sitting right next to you there.
Yeah.
And, appreciate that family and everything they've done for me in my racing career in the Minties, and everything that I learned from you and the Woodsides. And, you're right. Everybody helps until you get even with them. It's kind of
who I talked to just recently. I talked to him every once in a while. Michael
that?
Ayers.
Yes.
His dad was a starter.
He was, and
Remember
Michael's a
Mike?
tremendous fabricator.
Oh yeah, him and his kid Ryan back there, they're knocking them dead with that modified back there in the dirt.
Yeah, they're tearing up some dirt track racing.
Yeah.
Good for them.
Yeah. I stay in touch with him.
Good. I saw him at the Vegas race, and got to chat with him a little bit. So it was good seeing him and talking to him. But we're going to run out of time on this Zoom really quick.
Okay.
Brandon, what do you got? Anything for us, kid?
Well, I mean, I just had a couple quick questions here for you, quick answers here for you, Jimmy. What was your favorite car that you ever rode or drove?
Probably that last wedge car we had. That was the best driving race car I ever drove in my life. You couldn't drive it into the corner hard enough to mess it up, And I told the guys that, like, this guy bought a motor from Fisher, like the one we had, and the motor he sold to them put out more horsepower than the one we had, the factory motor we had in our car. And I jumped on Dennis Fisher about that. I said, "So how much better is that motor?" And he says, "Well, it's about 25 better." And I says, "We got the factory motor, and you're selling motors that are better." And he says, "Well, let me tell you something." He says, "If you could only get out of the car up there at Mesa Marin and watch yourself drive it into the corner," he says, "you're driving it in there 5 car lengths further than anybody else is." And he said, "The day he outruns you," he said, "we'll take care of that horsepower problem." He says, "I don't need to give you that." I said, "Well, I wouldn't have to drive the car as hard." He goes, "Yeah, bet me."
Interesting.
And the last question here for you, Jimmy, if you had to do it all over again, would you change anything?
Yeah, I'd probably learn to keep my mouth shut at times. It probably cost me some deals over the years, but I'm happy with everything I did. That I don't know that I would have ever had any other chances, but like I said, sometimes I would open my mouth before I thought. And I realize now that I got older, I shouldn't have done that, but that's the way it is when you're young.
Don't we all? Don't we
Yeah.
all?
So
Well, thank
it
you
was
so
fun,
much,
it
Jimmy.
was a fun life, I tell you.
Yes,
That's
sir.
awesome. Thank you so
Yeah,
much,
we-
Jimmy. Appreciate it.
All right. Well,
Appreciate you
thanks
taking the time.
thanks for doing this. It's been fun.
Thanks, Jimmy. It's been
All
great.
right.
Thanks, Pat.
All right.
Thanks, Karen.
Talk to you
All right.
later.
Thank
We
you
will.
so
We'll be
much,
in
everybody.
touch.